Hi guys, Nomis here. Welcome back to Nomishavn for episode number 49. So this is part 3 of the airport build, and today we'll finish the whole build. So the goal for this episode is to finish all the detailing of the inner parts of the airport. That means the tarmac, taxiways and runway. While doing this I set up a rough order of how I was going to do it. First get the rough parts of the network detailing down, then place the airplane gates. Then I need to sort out the tarmac surfaces before I add in a lot of smaller details. Finally I will add all the markings and lights for the runways, and then do taxiways wayfinding with all those small yellow signs, as well as the lighting for the taxiway as well. The first thing you see me doing here is creating the border which sits along all the taxiways with some decorative networks. And for the runway I'm using a different network for the border, all based on research from different airports and how these look and choosing the right assets. Because I want to do the detailing of the taxiway all myself, I needed a clean slate in the way of a blank network. What made the most sense was a lighter asphalt texture. At first I tried to just use an asphalt filler with IMT, but that meant some of the decorative networks I was gonna use on top of it didn't work out. So in the end I just used a lot of ploppable asphalt surfaces, which I copy and paste a bunch of times, and just with PIA where I need them to fit. To make it easier, I put an asphalt filler in IMT along the networks I used for the border, so that I don't need to align with the curve as much. To get the main detailing for taxiway, I used these yellow centerline networks which look perfect. Because the taxiways are one way in game, while they don't work like that in real life, the centerline had some weird pathing. So to make it more realistic I used these centerlines to detail them in a way to make it look like planes can go both directions on the taxiway. Using IMT I add some extra details to rough it up and make it look more real. Mostly some road wear decals and a few cracks, and I love the final look this gave. Over at the runway it was a little easier as I had no decorative networks to use in the middle, so I was able to just use an asphalt filler in IMT with a darker asphalt here. On top of it I used IMT to add some road wear, the big dashed line and the runway skid decals, which is one of the most important things to make it look like a real runway. You can see what I mean if you've seen a runway. At the four-way intersections along the taxiways, I wanted the center line to line up nicely with the path's planes take. As a temporary guideline, I draw in some white lines with IMT and use these as a reference to put the yellow center lines. Afterwards I can remove it, then I have a template of center lines which I can copy everywhere with Move It. Now before I cover the tarmac with the surface, I need to work out the markings and placements of the jet bridge for the gates. Here I just tried to put together something that made sense from my research on airports and just my own experience from flying. For the stop bar I picked one which had the different airplane models that I have in use at this airport and tried to line it up as well as I could. The jet bridge is made from props in this great pack in the workshop. There was a lot of merging props together and some adjusting with PO to make it all fit. Once I did it one time I had a template which I just copied with Move It on all the different gates. The tarmac surface is something I was really unsure about for a while. When I looked at references on different airports, there was quite a bit of variety, and I also had to find something fitting on the workshop. My main takeaway though was that it should be concrete. Apparently that is better for when bigger vehicles stay static there for longer periods. I ended up with these concrete tiles, which I'm very happy with when I see the end result. You save on prop count and be able to adjust them and convert these decals into procedural objects. Once I covered the whole tarmac with them, I wanted to add another detail which I often see on airports. You can see these small differences in the color of the surface, almost like a patchy look with lighter and darker areas. To do this in game, I just select some groups of the decals and either darken or lighten them. airport control tower is an important thing to have, and I figured over here was a good spot with a nice view over the runway and the whole airport. To have an easy connection to the airport, I make a sky bridge going right into the concourse. Right beside it I put a small open fire station so that I can use these nice airport fire engines assets that I found. On the center lines leading into the different gates, I'm adding these small markings with the number of the gate, something I saw a lot when looking for inspiration. Around the airport gates you often see a lot of different ground vehicles parked, and as so many airports have these marked out areas for this with some white lines. I use a simple white line decorative network to create a border for the parking area, and then I clutter it up with vehicles like the catering trucks, baggage carts and so on.
Feeling the warm rays upon my face. Leave all my worries in the gentle breeze. Big sunshine and new life in the way I need. Counting the days until summer. Feeling the warm rays upon my face. Leave all my worries in.
To give the airport that extra sense of functionality, I wanted to have ground vehicles moving around. And to do this, the best way is to create some bus lines looping around along the service road, using vehicle versions of different airport ground vehicles. I wanted to give them a place to spawn from inside the airport, so I created a concrete wall and some garage doors in the lower part of the concourse in 2 spots. Then I just put a block service cube for a bus depot inside to give the vehicles the option to spawn from here. And then I just create some lines along the service roads, with the baggage carts making loops right by some parked planes. I will get to the wayfinding signs for navigating different taxiways later on, but first off I just create some markings on the ground to show the names of the different taxiways. As you can probably see, there are 2 main runways, A and B, and then all the shorter connecting taxiways will be either A or B with a number associated with them. This made sense for the scale and layout of this particular airport that I made. What I wanted to do here is a little micro detailing with a few small scenes of things that go on around the airport on the tarmac. A catering truck filling up a plane, some luggage being loaded in, and a plane being filled up with fuel. I'm also adding in some industry worker spawners to have the animation of workers around the planes. Now I get into some final detailing on the runway before I do all the lighting. These big things with the arrows are what I believe is called blast pads, and together with it I use an asset for approach lights. A very important detail is also the big markings for the runway numbers, which are different on each end. I did some research on this, and according to the geography I imagined for Nomishavn and the way the runway is pointing, what made sense for the runway numbers were 14 and 32. I'm also adding all of these markings you always see on the runways that look like giant crosswalks, gradually shrinking in width. I don't know what this means at all, but I just looked at Google Earth of a runway to get the design and spacing from a real runway, and I think it looks pretty accurate in the end. And now we get to the lighting, and if you landed on an airport at night, you know how many different lights a runway can have, and it was pretty daunting to try and understand all of this to get a plan for how I was going to do it. There was quite a lot of research before I figured out how to design this, and I'll try to go over it a little. So first off, the edges of the runway has lights spaced around 60 meters apart. For the most part these are white lights, but there are yellow lights for the last 600 meters on each end. So this means that 600 meters of both ends of the airport need yellow lights. All of this I do with IMT and colored light props of different variations. Down the center line there is a lot of variation throughout the runway. Most of it is white lights, spaced about 15 meters apart. When we get into the last 900 meters of the runway, it starts alternating between red and white lights, with only red lights on the last 300 meters. Another thing I added is something called touchdown zone lights, which is something airports with rough weather and frequently lower visibility will have. These are the rows of white lights you can see me placing, looking like light bars. This will be on the runway for the first 900 meters on each end, spaced about 60 meters apart. the taxiway lights, it's a lot simpler and it's pretty much the same design throughout. For the edges, there will be blue lights spaced about 15 meters apart, while the center line has green lights, also spaced about 15 meters apart. The green center line lights will also be present where the taxiway has exit and entrances by the gates and the runway. Along all the different entrances to the runway, we need some special markings. First of all, we always need a hold line, telling airplanes where to stop before they get clearance to enter the taxiway. There's also usually a red square marking, and what's written inside varies from airport to airport. In some places they say the name/number of the runway, in others it just says simply runway ahead. Because this airport only has a single runway, I went with the runway ahead on this marking. Now lastly, we got the taxiway signs providing wayfinding for the pilots. The setup of these were a bit confusing until I understood the basics of them. In the middle there's a black square which has the runway you currently are on written. And then on the sides you got the direction of different taxiways you will enter at the intersections, along with their direction. From research it seems these should always be on the left side right before an intersection, so that is how I set them up here. So that is it for this episode, and it concludes a massive project with finishing the airport of Nomishavn. This was the first airport project for me, and while I'm far from an expert on this, then I'm quite pleased with the result. If you made it all the way here, I really appreciate you sticking until the end of the video. A like, comment and subscribe would be greatly appreciated and help me grow the channel. I also do have a Patreon should you wish to support me further. Anyways, that is it for today. Have a great rest of the day and hope to see you in the next one. And stay tuned for some cinematics of the Nomishavn International Airport.